Hello and welcome into Fantasy Focus Football, presented by NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. My name is Daniel Dopp, and I am joined by my two best friends, Stephania Bell and Field Yates. How are you guys doing? We had such a great weekend, which we're going to get into a little bit later on in the show, but obviously you can't bury the lead. Stephania, you're in a great-looking sweater right there.
Bahamas sweater because I think my mind is still in the Bahamas.
So is that where it's true? Yeah.
Yeah, it was left with my shoulder there. We'll dive into that a little bit later on in the show. Much more on the weekend that was. Complicated question, Hanser, and how I'm doing. No, you know what? I am here this morning with gratitude. Great to be here with you guys, and it's nice to have a little bit of a release, which is the hour we get to spend with everybody Monday through Friday talking about fantasy football. And, of course, before you know it, Fantasy Football Now, which is just 13 days away from our Week 1 episode.
I cannot wait for football to be here on a weekly basis, guys. It is going to be so much fun. We got a huge show planned for you guys today. We're talking about second-year wide receivers, our expectations for them, as well as some running backs that are going into their sophomore season. Do we expect a big jump or a slump? And we've got some insurance running back conversations. Who is the most valuable insurance running back in fantasy football? We're going to talk about all that in just a little bit. But first, it feels like we need to start with the guy that we have kind of been putting some vibes out there on, right? Ja'Marr Chase, we were talking maybe a little nervous because he has not showed up to practice. He has been very, very open in his stance that he wants a new contract from the Cincinnati Bengals. But we got good news yesterday. We finally saw him back at practice.
Yeah, if we were playing a game of something or nothing, I would say this was something. Now, I'm not exactly sure what that something is, but just this represents a change, obviously. Ja'Marr Chase, as you noted, has not practiced for the last 20-plus days with the Bengals when they have been working their way through training camp. I don't know if this means that something changed with a contract between Ja'Marr Chase and Cincinnati. I can't imagine that Ja'Marr just went from weeks of wanting a deal and not practicing as a result of wanting that deal to just saying, you know what, I'm good. Like, I'm cool. You know, they're right. These guys are right. I won't get a deal. I'll just wait until next offseason. Yeah. I'd be surprised if it was as simple as that. But we also haven't heard any reporting about a deal being done. So I don't know exactly what to make of this right now. We are having this conversation Monday at, just after 10 a.m. Eastern time. Maybe we hear from Ja'Marr. Maybe we hear from Zach Taylor. Maybe we hear from Joe Burrow or somebody, Stephania, that could enlighten us a little bit. But if I had a draft tonight, and this is one of the rare nights where I don't have a draft this week, I would feel a little bit more at ease about Ja'Marr Chase being a first-round pick. We always said, like, don't let him drop too low, right? And it felt like 9 was about as low as he could go. Now, maybe move him up a spot or two, and I still feel good with Ja'Marr Chase, somewhere between the range of 6 and 8.
I think that's very fair, Stephania.
No, I think it's encouraging. I was glad to see. I don't know what light practice means, right? You know, is it just I put on the uniform so I got like one step closer, like you said? I still have the concern that we talked about before with somebody who does not participate at all in training camp and then has to ramp up at a super fast pace to get involved in the offense. And if he's as involved as we'd like him to be, does that present a little bit more of an injury risk for him because he did not participate in camp?
Yeah, I'm with you right now on this one. I still have Justin Jefferson and Amon-Ra St. Brown ranked over top of Ja'Marr Chase. But if we find out, hey, this is over and he's going to be back 100%, we'll have another conversation as to what that will mean.
And that's fine because even if Ja'Marr Chase had never missed practice, not missed a day of training camp, and there was no issue whatsoever with this contract, there's still a pretty justifiable case for both Amon-Ra and Justin Jefferson. It's a nice tiebreaker right now to kind of keep him there third amongst those wide receivers within that tier. And I would just say, I know that people keep saying, well, you know, if you're going to sort of tax Ja'Marr Chase negatively, what about CeeDee Lamb? There continues to be a lot of optimism from local reporters and national reporters suggesting that while CeeDee is not done, the light at the end of the tunnel might be like fairly obvious. It's just like right before the start of the regular season.
Yep. All right, Stephania, we got another piece of news that we're going to touch on really quickly. Nick Chubb was placed on the physically unable to perform list. You had mentioned it on a couple of the recent podcasts that we did. Jerome Ford was likely going to start the season as the starter. Does this change anything in your estimation about Nick Chubb, or is this what you were sort of expecting to eventually happen?
This is exactly what I was expecting to happen. So I think, you know, this is in line with where they've been all along, that there's no timeline for his return. He said it. His coaches said it. The GM has said it. And so I think they're just taking the very cautious approach. And I think the spotlight will be off of him now. You know, there was all this question of will he or won't he, but I've been saying all along that this is a situation where you cannot count on the availability of Nick Chubb. You just hope that he's able, honestly for me, it's for the sake of the athlete.
Sure.
He's able to get back. I think for fantasy purposes, you have to really be concerned about not only whether he comes back or not, but just what kind of workload or volume he'd be able to deliver. And I don't think that's where I'd be putting my fantasy eggs in that basket.
Yeah, the toughest thing for me on Nick Chubb, and we mentioned this weekend, Stephania, is that if he's going to miss the first 4 weeks of the season, and
Guaranteed, by the way.
Guaranteed
he's going to miss it, and you only have one IR spot in your league, and then someone else on your team gets hurt, are you going to continue to hold Nick Chubb not even knowing what the future is going to be for him? That's the part that makes it difficult, because it kind of feels, I don't want to say like you're wasting a spot, but you are putting it on long-term hold without knowing when you're going to be able to potentially open that back up.
That's a totally valid question, and I just would say tread lightly, because where Nick Chubb's ADP has skyrocketed to is a meaningful difference from where it was at the beginning of training camp, and it's meaning that you are paying. And I get it. We often remind people that, like, you know, once you get to round 10, a lot of these picks are just lottery tickets.
There's no bad picks. Yeah.
That being said, you know, the difference between a round 10 lottery ticket can be decidedly different from a round 14 lottery ticket. On top of that, I don't know when he's going to return. I'm not sure that anybody does specifically. But the Browns, who are usually quite transparent, have let us know the possibility of Nick Chubb showing up around like Thanksgiving is in play. Yeah. I'm not saying that they've said that specifically, but they keep saying at some point during the 2024 season. Just a reminder that Jerome Ford is a fantasy value right now. I would not be surprised if his ADP climbs up as a result of this news on Nick Chubb, which probably should have been expected in the first place. But when you go out there and you squat 600-plus pounds on video, people tend to do what all of us do as humans, which is get excited. And just in the ever-evolving world of the NFL's CBA and rules that impact players' availability, just to be clear, PUP, which he is remaining on, automatically means he is out for the first 4 games of this upcoming regular season. Tomorrow, Tuesday, 4 p.m. Eastern time, the NFL whittles down rosters from 90 to 53. It's the first time they've ever done one big, gigantic roster reduction. We will see tons of players go on the PUP list, which immediately means they're out for the first month of the season. And in the case of a lot of them, it's going to be much further into the regular season than just those first 4 weeks.
You mentioned ADP with where we're at right now. Nick Chubb, currently, obviously, before we got this news, coming off the board, pick 117 in the 12th round. Jerome Ford at 128.7 behind Nick Chubb.
I feel like I've been saying all along that this was likely going to be the scenario, and it just baffles me that that's
people
been
hear
the
what
order.
they want to hear.
I know, and see viral videos that they want to see. You've learned that, But my point is,
Sure have,
But my point is that I think it's this optimism, right? Because you want to believe in the player, and he's been such a good player, and I appreciate all of that. But just from the standpoint of what he had done, what the injury is, protecting him for not only the rest of whatever NFL career he has left, but his life
after that,
long-term health.
Correct. Yes.
This has always been the outlook.
I will also note that last thing here on Nick Chubb is that, like, if you're taking a dart throw on one of 2 starting running backs coming off of a knee injury that I think could reasonably end up on the PUP list, I would lean towards Jonathan Brooks over Nick Chubb, because while I am still not certain when Jonathan Brooks is going to return, if you told me, like, hey, one of these guys will be on the field in week 5 and playing in some capacity, I would tend to lean towards Jonathan Brooks over Nick Chubb.
Yeah, I think I'm with you.
I don't know that, but I just say it based off of everything the teams have told us and the nature of their respective injuries.
Right, exactly. The nature
I would
of the
lean
is
towards
very
it.
different.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about a couple of second-year wide receivers if we're expecting breakouts or slumps from some of these guys. We didn't get every single sophomore wide receiver in here. This is just a handful of them to be able to talk about. But I feel like we got to just really quickly, and we can do this very fast. We got to start with Puka Nacua. Finished as wide receiver 4 last year field. Obviously, it seems like besting a wide receiver 4 finish in your second year, which no one expected to have happen, is going to be tough. Even if he has a slump, I expect some regression. I'm sure we all do. I don't expect it to be so far down this list. He's still going to be a top 10 wide receiver, and I feel like we can kind of leave it at that.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I'm not playing within the spirit of the segment when I say this. It's going to be neither of these things, right? It's not going to be a breakout because going from wide receiver 4 to wide receiver 1 means like you've already established yourself as a star.
Right.
And it would be very hard to do. It's also not going to be a slump because I think he is appropriately being drafted somewhere in the second round. What I will say about this entire segment is that in the case of second-year players, I think two dynamics are very important to keep in mind.
Okay.
One is that we often see the biggest leap in player progression from year 1 to year 2. Makes sense, right? Year 1, during training camp, you're figuring out what your teammates' names are. Year 2, you're figuring out a whole lot more nuanced and important things.
Yep.
And second thing is assuming no system shift, like no new offensive coordinator or play caller. A lot of times the play caller is learning how to utilize that player better, which I think will be an important thing that I'll discuss in a couple of players from right now. Puka Nacua was outstanding in year 1. He can get better for sure, but like he's going from, Pro Bowl level player to whatever is left above that. But the second bucket is like the Rams masterfully utilized Puka Nacua last year.
Yes.
Like just from a sheer volume standpoint, it would be hard for them to more impeccably use Puka Nacua when he had 15 targets in his very first game last season, right? Like, yes, there are ways that they could probably like be an even better offense in real life, but from fantasy, you can't ask for anything more than what we got last season.
Doesn't seem like it.
I know. I was just thinking Matthew Stafford is a type. Like he has his receiver and he goes to him and loves him. And that's why it was actually pretty impressive that when Cooper Kupp came back, they both managed to still get quite a bit of volume. So it'll be interesting to see when he has both of them out of the gate this year, starting strong, how that volume is divided.
Yep.
With you on that. All right, we like Puka Nacua, though, this year. We're going to move on from that. Let's talk about Rashee Rice.
Oh, yeah.
He was the guy that finished second highest amongst rookie wide receivers last year. Finished as wide receiver 27 in fantasy points, but he obviously developed a lot of chemistry with Patrick Mahomes in that offense. Had an 18.5% target share with only Travis Kelce there and a bunch of other wide receivers that didn't really move the needle a whole lot. Now they've added Hollywood Brown, who is hurt. Yep. For what it's worth, Stephania, we can talk about that in a minute.
He's a fellow.
Yes, a fellow
upper
shoulder
body.
Injury. That's right.
Thing guy. Yeah.
And then also Xavier Worthy, who a lot of buzz coming out of camp and the draft. Obviously, he ran the fastest 40 time ever at the combine. I mean, when you look at Rashee Rice, I just want to ask you, Field, like, how much higher can he be if he finishes wide receiver 27, knowing that they added 2 pass catchers they're hoping to get involved this year?
Yeah, he can be a lot higher than that, but it's worth noting that we had 2 separate Rashee Rice seasons last year, right? There was
exactly.
the first half of the year in which
before week 9 and then after the bye.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So after the bye, Rashee Rice became the most important pass catcher not named Travis Kelce on that offense. And in some weeks, he actually was more important than Travis Kelce. Mike's touched on this a couple of times. It's worth noting that like the Chiefs' offense is going to look a lot different this year, not just from the personnel standpoint, but Patrick Mahomes was death by 1,000 paper cuts once they kind of found their way in the passing game last year. It was people get pissed when you say dink and dunk. I'm not trying to be, listen, I could say no bad things about Patrick Mahomes.
It was his lowest ADOT ever.
Yes, by far. His average air yards per attempt was way down for Patrick Mahomes. They did not have the pieces in place to air it out. Now they do. So I think Rashee Rice will be a different player. I'm going to actually buy on him being an improved player from wide receiver 27 last year, acknowledging that a suspension is still possible, even though we're now 10 days away from their first game. Seems unlikely for the beginning of the season. And this is going to be a category where I think I talked about those, like those 2 different buckets. The player I think will be better this year. I don't think Rashee Rice was utilized last year as like just the wide receiver screen guy because that's all he has in his bag, Stephania. I think that was a byproduct of what the Chiefs were able to do last year offensively. I think there's more to his game, and he'll show it this season.
Agreed. But the fact that he can be so quick after the catch, he was average 8.5 yards after the catch last season, second only to Deebo Samuel. And so that tells you that once he gets the ball in his hands, he can move. Obviously, Xavier Worthy were interested, like speed down the field. He's got that. But I think Rashee Rice can be any of those things, like Field was talking about, whether he's a screen guy or whether they use him a little bit more on the outside. To Field's point from earlier, he was targeted more than 5 times only twice before the break in the season, right? They had their bye like around, I think it was week 9 or week 10. And when he came back, he was targeted more than 5 times every single week, including double-digit targets in 2 of those weeks. So it was definitely, that's why when you look at the season-long stats, it's not as favorable towards him as it was in the back half of the season. And you wonder if with those deep threats, when Hollywood Brown comes back, you've got speed, him and Xavier Worthy, if it doesn't open up some more situations for Rashee Rice.
Yeah, I do. I just wanted to use this note because it's a great one from the researcher on today's show. He was 229th in his average depth of target last season. That's crazy.
That's crazy.
It's a crazy stat. But just to underscore how much of a sort of screen game receiver he was, that number I think could easily catapult from at least 229th to 129th. That would be a big jump.
Absolutely.
Also, not for nothing, but in the game where they played all their starters together, the most volume, Patrick Mahomes was like Rashee Rice, and Rashee Rice. It was like 3 plays in a row. That's who he was looking for, which I find interesting. You've only got a limited number of plays, and who are you working on it with? Predominantly him.
Yep. No wide receiver over the last 7 days has seen their ADP rise more than Rashee Rice Field, in part because not having that suspension come across as we thought it might happen means that he has turned into a value in fantasy football, currently coming off the board as the 33rd wide receiver. He's absolutely going to beat that this year.
If when our week 1 ranks drop, and I believe they're going to drop as soon as this Friday, he will be probably 15 slots higher than wide receiver 33.
Yep.
Even against a good Ravens defense.
With you on that. All right, let's talk about the Ravens. What a segue, my friend. Who knew you were so good at hosting? Zay Flowers finished as wide receiver 31 last year. Here's my big question. Stephania, I'm going to throw this at you. Zay Flowers.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Zay Flowers.
I'm nervous. Big question.
Is in an offense where we love all the things that are happening here, right? They got Derrick Henry. We're very big on Derrick Henry. Mark Andrews is still going to be fantastic. They didn't really add a pass catcher that makes you feel like, whoa, there's going to be a ton of targets that just get taken away from Zay. But Lamar Jackson has only supported 1 top 25 wide receiver in fantasy football in his career. Do you think that Zay Flowers can become the second one to be able to be at least a top 25 wide receiver with Lamar Jackson?
I think it's possible. I don't know if it's probable. I think that the Zay Flowers upside is super, super high. But I'll be curious to see how they divide up the looks in this Ravens offense. This is really interesting to me. 206.4 PPR fantasy points last season, 5th most of any Ravens wide receiver under John Harbaugh. I suppose that doesn't surprise me because they haven't had a lot of consistent deep targets for Lamar Jackson. But still, after just 1 year, that seems to indicate that he's a pretty focal point for Lamar Jackson to lock into. So if there's big plays, I think it's going to be him. I just think that Derrick Henry, it's going to be interesting what he takes away from the passing game.
Yeah, the question is whether it's kind of like a chicken versus egg dilemma.
I was thinking about that too.
You want to use that? Is that like Lamar, and we talked about this a lot going into last season. Maybe it was 2 seasons ago. I think it was last year, though. I think there was some Rashad Bateman buzz.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, guys, like Lamar
is this going to be the year?
Had a wide receiver that's like meaningfully produced over the long haul of a season, other than that 1 year in which Hollywood Brown was wide receiver 22, which is not terrible, right? But it's not elite. And why, if you're the Ravens, would you change when you're consistently amongst the best teams in the NFL? And coming off last year in which Lamar, what did he do last year? Oh, he won the NFL MVP.
Oh, that's right. Reigning NFL MVP.
So there's not a big reason for the Ravens to change things. However, I do think this might be one of those where I am banking on the player making a big leap and the team not altering how they play offense, but just leaning more into the ways which are best suited for Zay Flowers. Because what's interesting about Zay is if you saw him walking the streets, you'd be like, that is an incredibly jacked human, but he's also not like this big guy. He's a small receiver that plays big, as opposed to, I thought Quentin Johnson coming out of the draft was a big receiver that played small, and it kind of reared itself last year in his rookie season. Zay was a vertical threat, but he obviously is excellent when the football is in his hands near the line of scrimmage. So I am banking on Zay having a meaningful step forward for the Ravens because they just haven't had somebody like him in all of these years with Lamar. Like, I am buying that construct a little more than I am the idea that Lamar has just never supported a top 20 wide receiver in his years as a starting quarterback.
Well, you mentioned it too off the top. Like if you're talking about a guy that was wide receiver 31 his rookie season.
Yep.
Second half of the season, like down the stretch, week 12 through 18, we saw a handful of really big games from him, kind of came into his own. Yeah. Now you get another year. That second year of a leap, if he can be wide receiver 31 as a rookie wide receiver in this Ravens offense, and you tell me, I don't think it's at all out of the question that wide receiver 22 of what Hollywood Brown, the highest that he's ever had, it seems like that's at least in play for him to be able to hit that mark. Currently coming off the board as the 25th wide receiver, which is about where we have him ranked right now.
I think where we're going to see the difference, this is what I think, is in the big play. Because Mark Andrews was injured for a lot of last year. Mm-hmm. And when they're in that red zone, he's such a huge threat for takeaways. So now he's healthy. You have to pay attention to him. Derrick Henry is going to be a huge threat in that same region. So where do they get the opportunity? I'm thinking like in that 25 to 40 yards out from the end zone, that's where you're going to see Zay Flowers. So if all he does are big plays or run away with the football when he gets it, that's a lot of fantasy points. But will he get it every single week? It's harder to predict.
Yeah, he's not going to be a guy that gets a lot of end zone targets given his size and stature, right? Like especially when you've got
not close in, I don't think.
Well, right, especially when you have Derrick Henry to be able to pound at the goal line, or bigger guys like Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews. All right, let's talk about another wide receiver here.
Okay.
Houston Texans. Oh my gosh, we've had so many conversations about these three wide receivers, guys. Tank Dell had 7 touchdowns in 11 games last year. He was unbelievable as a rookie. We were super high on what his sophomore season could be. And then the team went out and traded for Stephon Diggs. I kind of dumped a little bit. It's like, I don't want to say it's a wet blanket, but like on Tank Dell's fantasy value, like Stephon Diggs sort of like dumped some, cold water all over us and where we thought things were going to be. So Field, I don't think he can repeat what he did last year, given the addition of Diggs to this offense. What can he be, knowing that you've got 3 guys here? Is top 25 out of the question? Is top 30 more likely?
I think end of season fantasy points finish, top 25 is in play.
But he's going to have more up and down weeks given that.
100%.
Yeah.
And, the first preseason game in which the Texans play, C.J. Stroud's on the field, throws a touchdown pass to Tank Dell. Incredible. A reminder, this guy is a stud. Before getting hurt last year, he was wide receiver 8. So he finished, he said, wide receiver 39. But that, of course, factors the half season he missed being on IR. Tank Dell is incredible. He's a great football player, playing with a great quarterback.
Yep.
In an offense that will play a ton with 3 receivers on the field. I also think that he will be the 3rd wide receiver in terms of total snaps played in games in which he is also on the field with Stephon Diggs and Nico Collins. I think by now people know where I stand on this. I think Stephon Diggs is the highest floor, week in, week out. I think he will lead the team in wide receiver targets. This is my stance. I think Nico Collins has the highest ceiling, and I think he will have the most boom games. I think that Tank Dell is the lowest floor because I think there will be games where he is just the odd man out. But I also think he will have 5 games or so this season. Some are, I'm saying a handful arbitrarily, right? Some number of games this year where he goes off because he's great and he plays with C.J. Stroud. But someone has to be 3rd of them, Stephania, and there's just not a lot of history of 3 wideouts from the same team being consistent lineup blocks.
It really isn't. I mean, Tank Dell led the team in targets, in receiving touchdowns. I mean, he was the focal point for a while before he got hurt, as you say. You and I are a little bit different. I think Nico Collins is the one who gets the most volume and has. I think there'll be weeks where Stephon Diggs is invisible, but I think he presents a huge threat. Like, obviously, they're just such a high-volume potency offense. I think there will be enough to make Tank Dell worthwhile having on your roster. I certainly don't mind him as a flex option, but I think the focal point of him in the game like those days, I don't think we're going to see them like we did last year. Yeah. The good news, though, about just health-wise, because I know people wonder fractured fibula, it's kind of what Tony Pollard, very similar injury to what Tony Pollard had, and we saw him struggle. Very different players, very different positions. Yep. And Tank Dell was back in spring practices, had that incident where he was injured, soft tissue injury with his thigh related to a gunshot, actually. But he came back and hasn't missed a step from any of that. So if anybody was wondering, just putting a little bow on that, he's totally healthy coming into the year.
This is one of those situations I feel like in a draft where people are going to have to make the mental decision. do I want to take the potential wide receiver 3 in this offense or a wide receiver 1 of a different offense? Guys right around it, Malik Neighbors is real close to where Tank Dell is coming off the board. Zay Flowers is right
not
next
even
to
a question for me.
right? And so it feels like Tank Dell, we've got a lot that we love about him, but I feel like that's elevated his value given all the 3 wide receiver stuff.
But even if, and again, I don't know that he'll rank, he'll probably be a fringe top 30 wideout in my week 1 rankings. He's the most valuable insurance policy wide receiver in the NFL.
I agree.
Because if he's one injury to either of those 2 starters away from being a top 20 player.
Yep. On a weekly basis.
Right now, the top receiver ranking, whoever you think it is, whether you're team Stephon Diggs like me or team Nico Collins, like I think pretty much everybody else on this show, there's if it was just 2 of them versus 3 of them, the highest ranking is going to go even higher.
Yeah.
Right? Like if Tank Dell weren't available, Stephon Diggs might be wide receiver 12 for me, and Nico Collins might be wide receiver 14. But because there's a third guy in, I've got Diggs as like wide receiver 16 and Collins is like wide receiver 19. So Dell is one of the most important players to be drafted. Like you actually might be able to justify paying close to full freight on Tank Dell, even if his value is in touch contingent upon the health of the other 2 wide receivers on his roster. Because when you get into bye weeks and you're having to throw some darts, like I'm okay with throwing that dart on Tank Dell every once in a while. Like I am acknowledging, and who knows how this is all going to play out. But if it plays out like I expect it to, I'm okay acknowledging that like there's going to be some dud weeks. But the possibility for like 5, 108 and a touchdown for Tank Dell in week 1 is of course in play.
Yeah. Wide receiver 26 for me, it feels like when you're drafting him there, it's like you're looking at him as a weekly flex play for your fantasy roster. I'd rather have him as like my first bench wide receiver, just given the uncertainty of the target share within that offense.
Also, Joe Mixon's there now. And I mean, I think he's going to eat up some targets too in a way that their running backs haven't recently.
We'll talk about this more later, but I am like remarkably sweaty right now. So if you guys see me at some point, like my shirt starts to like, I'm sorry, I am just like toasty.
You don't need to apologize about anything for like the next Fields. You are a true. We're gonna get to it, but you are an absolute trooper. I already said this, and the internet has said it too. You are the Matthew Stafford of fantasy analytics. So pumped that you're out here. All right. Another wide receiver. Last one that we are going to talk about. We already had a lot of conversation around Jaden Reed and Christian Watson, so we're going to table that sophomore conversation with Jaden Reed and talk about Jackson Smith and Jigba. Still in the Seattle offense, they have an offensive coordinator change. Ryan Grubb coming over from the University of Washington. It's another year. Talk about another 3 wide receiver team. Is there a chance in this? I don't think that he's going to overtake DK Metcalf as the wide receiver 1 in that offense. You can tell me if you disagree. But I do think that there is a definitive chance that he becomes the very clear wide receiver 2 over Tyler Lockett.
This might be the one where we've like totally just missed the mark right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like we need to be ranking Jackson Smith and Jigba as like wide receiver 23 or something. It's hard to, there's a little bit of like needing to see it.
And a little bit of the wide receivers. And like, how do you move him up? Wide receiver 23 to 35 field. There's so many good guys there.
That's a lot of guys you're going to have to jump ahead of. And Tyler Lockett, even at his advanced age, I'm not going to go Mike. I'm not going Mike.
Okay, Mike Clay.
His advanced age, even coming off of an off season in which they required him to take a pay cut to stick around, right? He's still a factor. He's not going to just fade away into the ether here. So JSN, such a talented guy. This does feel like one. I will remind people, like, I don't think Seattle went into the draft last year saying we really need to target a 3rd wide receiver early. I think it was a byproduct of the draft falling in a way that was unexpected. Remember that no wide receiver taken until the 20th pick in real life, not this past draft, but the year prior. So it might end up being like a luxury pick for a couple of seasons that proves to be like a long-term starter for them. So I feel wrong having him outside the top 40, Daniel. So I'm acknowledging that could be a big whiff. But great depth at wide receiver and the presence of DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, he could still be the 3rd wide receiver in this offense.
Yeah.
He could be, but I don't think he will be. Like I'm just high on him. I think because he's sneaky and it's valuable. You can draft him right now because I think he doesn't excite people. We talk about these non-sexy picks who can end up being super productive, and I think he is exactly one of those picks. I love Tyler Lockett, but He's another one where we've seen the streaks of Tyler Lockett being hot or not, and he is a veteran receiver who I think is there more as the leadership veteran, because that's not what DK Metcalf provides. In fact, it's the opposite of that. So I think between like sometimes the quiet, it's a little bit of tortoise and the hare, right? I mean, I think Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to slowly climb up, and by the end of the season, I think he could be their number one.
Wow.
It's crazy to say, but it sounds crazy to say because of the pure talent of DK Metcalf, but I'm building in a lot of other things.
I think this offense is going to throw the ball, I think, a lot this year if you look at the way – I'm hoping that they throw the ball out this year.
It could be one of the seismic shifts in the NFL. I mean, Ryan Grubb, again, you mentioned it, Daniel. He comes from University of Washington, and maybe it was the personnel he had.
He had some good wide receivers there, to be fair.
Yeah, he goes from a great wide receiver trio to a great wide receiver trio, right? But they chuck that thing all over the yard. College football is a very different animal than the NFL. No two ways about that, but – that was an aggressive scheme in college that, if he carries it to the NFL, will mean really good things for all the Seahawks wide receivers.
Probably my biggest concern is, and Mike has brought this up on the show, is the offensive line could use some work. And so being able to make sure that Geno Smith has time to be able to find those guys downfield is going to be really big. All right, let's switch from wide receivers to running backs. A couple of guys here that we're expecting to potentially or hopefully potentially do some more things this year. Tyjae Spears. I want to start here because we've been going back and forth about what we're going to do with either Tony Pollard or Tyjae Spears. They're very similar kind of running backs in the same backfield. This last preseason game, we saw Tony Pollard run right off the gate with the ones. Yeah. Tyjae Spears still got a lot of playing time, came in with the twos, but it was Tony Pollard that was out there on the field first. I don't want to read too much into preseason action field, but I want to ask you, when you see something like that, does that give you any pause on thinking, I think maybe this is more where the team is leaning and we need to adjust things?
Made me think a little bit, but we've also learned that perhaps more than any other position in the NFL, you'll see a legitimate factor at running back in there with some depth level players, because you can only play one running back at a time, right? So it's like, hey, could you have split those reps with the ones up? Absolutely, you could have. But Stephania was talking about this recently on
this weekend.
The contract. The Dolphins, about how just like, it's like the guys the person who's actually managing those snaps, the running backs coach, like it's so much more feel than it is like, here's how it's going to work. The first 7 snaps go to Tony Pollard, and then Tyjae Spears takes over at snap 8 through 12, right? A lot of it is like, hey, if Tony Pollard gets like 3 straight clean runs where like he just kind of sort of just walks out of bounds because a defender like angle tackles him as opposed to smokes him, he might be fine. But if Tony Pollard on the first play of the game gets jacked up by some, Colts linebacker, it might be like, all right, you're right out, because so it's more predictable. Here's what I'll say about Tyjae Spears and Tony Pollard. This is the flag that I've planted on these two guys. I would be surprised if either of them started the season ahead of the other one and stayed the full season ahead of the other. I think there is just too many factors that work in the favor of each of them, and too many factors that work against the favor of each of them to think that this is ever going to become one guy is the clear alpha and one guy is the clear only just in case back.
I'll tell you what, that's exactly the way that ADP and everyone who is drafting looks at it, because they are back-to-back, 2 picks apart. Yeah. Exactly.
And that feels like the right thing. I mean, Tony Pollard talked about, in our running backs feature that we did, talked about feeling like he got a fresh start going to Tennessee, expects to be used a lot in the passing game. It reminded me that he was a receiver in college first, and that's, he's good at catching passes out of the backfield. But part of the reason he came to play there was he felt like he could get a refresh. Remember last year, injured to start the season, coming off the ankle injury. We were just talking about that, where an ankle fracture in a big receiver is very different than a running back who needs to be nimble and make a lot of cuts. And he said he really didn't feel like he was himself till the back half of the season. We talk about that. Players won't usually admit it, but then in the following season, they'll tell you, yeah, I wasn't really myself till the second half. So it'll be interesting to see for him having a healthy offseason, new regime, feels like he's able to be used in all these different ways. That provides them more options to do exactly what we're talking about, which is use those running backs, have some versatility in the game, and interchange them. And I think that's what they want to do.
I do not think that either of these backs is like ideally equipped to be like a 250 carry guy. And I think the Cowboys learned that last year with Tony Pollard. I think that Tyjae Spears, given his stature, and he was so far it's been no problem, but huge medical question mark coming out of
Absolutely, yes. very much so.
A lot of teams were just going to bypass that player
right off the board.
Yep. And he has held up. I'm not trying to he deserves a lot of credit for that. I don't think either of these guys though is I think having a 1A and 1B or 1A and 1A might be best for the two styles of players that they have. And last thing I'll say, this might be a super pass-heavy offense. Brian Callahan, of course, comes from Cincinnati. Mike likes to remind us how pass-heavy it was there.
Yeah. Yep. Obviously, it's tough to be able to project goal line carries there when you're moving from Derrick Henry to either one of these two guys to be who is going to get the goal line stuff. Yeah, it's going to be a very different offense there this year. All right, what about Chase Brown, guys? We've been having this conversation back and forth. It feels like Chase Brown has started to overtake Zack Moss as the running back one of this offense, in spite of the fact that we saw Zack Moss be really good last year, Stephania, when he took over for Jonathan Taylor in Indianapolis. If you were drafting today, would you have Chase Brown on your draft board ahead of Zack Moss as the running back one of that offense?
Yeah, this one's tough for me, but I feel like the Chase Brown chatter has sort of got me thinking about him more. This is one where I don't think out of the gate it's like, ooh, Chase Brown dramatically over Zack Moss. But I do think that there is this upside feel to Chase Brown, and he is likely going to become the number one for the Bengals by the time the season is over. Last year, he had no touches inside the 5. He's not somebody you think of as your goal line back who's going to score, but he impressed them in various spots throughout the season, able to catch the ball well, multi-purpose running back who they like a lot. And Zack Moss has had some injury concerns of his own over his career thus far. So there's a lot to like about Chase Brown, I think, quietly.
Yeah, this one's been a hard one for me to suss out, in part because I think that there are some things that Zack Moss doesn't do at like a super high level. I also think Zack Moss does some of the stuff that running back coaches and offensive coordinators just love. Excellent pass protector, gets tough, gritty yards, right? That I think that allows him to hold value a little bit more. Not in fantasy.
And NFL value.
Real value that it's I don't know that he is going to, meaning Chase Brown, is going to ever be able to have a dominant role. So these guys are being ranked as such as well. So that's no problem for our concerns. It's not like anybody is sitting here saying Chase Brown needs to be drafted as a top 25 running back. They aren't. I have held steady with Moss leaning ahead in my rankings. Partly because, Cincinnati did make the concerted effort to sign him this offseason, 2 years, $8 million. Not crazy money, but still a little bit of money. And he was really good last year.
Yes, he was.
Zack
Moss was really good.
He was a little bit of glue for them when Taylor went down. It was
first 4 weeks of the season, we were like, there's no way. There's no way. Oh, my God, there is a way. Remember, it was Trey Sermon and kind of the roller coaster of running backs behind Jonathan Taylor we were talking about. Maybe it was it Deion Jackson? Remember him? He was still there with the Colts.
Yep.
Yeah, remember that one time he looked pretty good in preseason, right? No, Zack Moss, third-round pick in his own right, by the way, just a few years ago, held up pretty well for Indianapolis last year. So I lean towards Zack Moss, but this is a backfield that I have not been targeting a ton in drafts.
Yeah, everybody right now in ADP leaning towards Zack Moss. There's a 25-pick difference between the two. Chase Brown, for what it's worth, coming off the board in the 14th round. I mean, he's basically free, and given what his potential workload could be in this offense, especially if anything were to happen to Zack Moss, I don't know what he would look like from a goal line perspective, but given all that passing game work that you talked about, Stephania, 14th round dart throw on Chase Brown, not bad. I'm very okay with that. All right, let's talk about one more running back here, Jaleel McLaughlin. And this one is interesting because it seems very obvious to us that Javonte Williams, Field, who you have started to talk up more and more as we've gotten closer to the season, is definitely going to be the guy. He's the guy they expect to be the running back one of this offense. No one's thinking Jaleel McLaughlin is going to come in and potentially take that away from him at the start of the season. But what do you think he could turn into over the course of this season?
This one will be interesting over the next, let's call it 30 or so hours, because Denver might be one running back heavy right now. I think Jaleel McLaughlin has a little bit of Tony Pollard to his game in this regard. I don't think you ever want him being a big, huge focal point of your offense every single week. Smaller back.
He's not a big
incredibly fast. Awesome big play player. Effective in the passing game. Just don't know that that's exactly what you want to have out of a guy that's handling the rock. I don't know if he's the kind of guy you want to have handling the rock 15 to 20 times, which is why I do think Javonte Williams, kind of like a really young version of James Conner. Boring but useful running back 2 potentially. So I think he's a totally fine dart throw, but I I think he's appropriately ranked as running back 48 right now.
Yeah, I think that's very fair.
I feel like listen, it's my word, so I can say how I feel, but like I don't want to be misconstrued as being like all in on Javonte Williams. It's just that right now, when I look at the running backs that are being drafted in the 11th round, it's like one of these things is not like the other. Most of the other guys going in the 11th round, like I don't project to be the starting running back on their team who might also carry the rock a lot. Javonte Williams, I do. So I'm surprised that a player who was 15th in the NFL in touches last season is falling this low.
So I think this is one of the things that, and if anything were to happen to Javonte Williams again and he were to miss time this season, I don't know anything more than what I've seen and watching the preseason, but it feels like they like Audric Estime too as a potential like bruiser, like first and second down kind of a back. Given what you said about the stature of Jaleel McLaughlin, like you're not going to go out there and throw him out there to have a million touches in this offense, given how small he is. So even if that were to happen with Javonte Williams, I don't know how big the role would obviously increase, but I don't know as though it would bloom into something that's so large that it's like he automatically becomes a top 25 running back in our weekly rankings.
Yeah, and this is a really tough running back room for me to read. Like you said, they might be one heavy. Samaje Perine's the other running back that we're not mentioning, but he is the pass protection guy. Yep. He is like a like a security blanket running back, I think, for the Broncos. And so it's really hard to imagine like how do you get rid of that security blanket for a rookie that you obviously went out and got? He was 5th round, I think. So you obviously wanted him, and they really like him, like you said. Javonte Williams, if he can get back to what he was after that horrible knee injury, which again, we're talking about 2 years removed from it, and I expect better things out of him. And then now we're talking about where's Jaleel McLaughlin fit in all this. This is the hardest, or at least one of the hardest running back rooms for me to read.
I need to figure out, and I may be the one saying it wrong, is it McLaughlin or is it McLaughlin? Because all I think about is Sarah McLaughlin every time I say his name, and I'm not the only one that does it. I'm
Jaleel. It's Jaleel.
It's Jaleel. Yeah. Exactly. Thank you, Field. Thank you for that.
I'll give you. This is unscripted. I'll give you one last name for running back, and I'm not. This is not like a troll. Like, hey, like you guys have been down this path before. But I think Cam Akers is a much more important insurance policy than.
I just tweeted.
All right, hold on. Well, let's save that then. Let's have this conversation because we're about to jump into some insurance running backs. Field.
Okay, I didn't know how much time we had left when we're going to go. When we're going to what we're going to do.
You need to save time for
for some other things. Yeah, let's be quick on this then. If you were going to rank insurance running backs, I think that right now Tyler Algier and Blake Corum are the clear 1-2 top insurance running backs in fantasy football. Do you agree with that?
Big time. Yeah, big time. I'm not sure it's close, and I think you can make a case for Blake Corum even ahead of Tyler Algier.
Yeah. Given all the things that we saw from Tyler Algier last year.
Algier has, been a minimal factor in the passing game. So you could make the case, like, Blake Corum may not have exactly the Kyron Williams role, and not like Kyron dominated as a pass catcher every single game last year, but you could make the case of Blake Corum ahead of Tyler Algier. Yeah. It's close, though. Very close. Yep.
Very close. All right, so then if those are the clear-cut 1 and 2 guys, who's third on this list? And is it worth, outside of those two, who I believe is worth drafting in standard 10-team leagues, is there another insurance back that you're like, boy, I got to run out and get a guy like Braylon Allen or a Jalen Wright in case anything happens in Miami? Is there another insurance back that it's like, I got to get him?
I feel like it's Trey Benson is one of them because James Conner is, solid. And another value pick, I think James Conner is going way late for
how
productive he was. I know this is another one where I think some names get boring because people like seeing him, like it's not shiny new object.
Right.
But James Conner's been solid. He's been productive, and he's also been fairly consistent at missing a few weeks each year. So when he does, who is the most likely to step up? Trey Benson, who obviously is a talented rookie who can do everything. And it's not going to be a question mark about what his role will be, just to see how quickly is he adapting to the NFL.
Yeah. Khalil Herbert might be like nipping on the heels of those first two guys.
Okay.
I think he's a factor for that Chicago offense this year.
If anything were to happen to DeAndre Swift.
Even with DeAndre Swift healthy, I think he'll play a decent role.
Really?
He's a good player.
Do you think that with that estimation.
I think it's going to be annoying for DeAndre Swift managers.
10-team leagues, would you think Khalil Herbert is draftable, or is he your guy that you're looking at off of waivers?
Probably off of waivers, but that also might be, like a 10-team league in which people prioritize those insurance policies, then yes, he's fine. Yeah, but I don't think he's a must draft. But I would say in a 10-team league, like if we just learned this over the weekend in the Bahamas, like people like ADP takes in all the extremes as well, right?
Yes.
Like, if you have an ADP of, wide receiver 35, it might be because in some ways you're going as wide receiver 15 and others are going as wide receiver 55.
Yep.
So
It was crazy to see people fall in the drafts that we did this weekend.
I think if I were to take away a lesson that I think we need to talk about more and more and more is when you talk about draft strategy, it's your team. That's what I was reminded of this weekend. People are going to do what they feel like. You know why? Because it's their team. It's not mine.
Yeah.
Yep.
We are all here to take a bunch of factors, sort of calculate the importance of them, and then package them in this tiny little box that says I've got Javonte Williams, my running back 23. But they may say, you know what? I love Javonte Williams. I'm going to take him before then. Or, you know what? I hate Javonte Williams. I won't touch him with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about Cam Akers then. You brought it up before we get into this. Why do you think that he's at least worth a consideration as an insurance?
I don't even know if Dameon Pierce is on the team by tomorrow.
Yeah, it's very, very, very strange. And Cam Akers, if you have been watching him in the preseason, I actually tweeted this last night because we were talking about him running and the fact that he's getting the ball and looks good. The guy's had 2 torn Achilles, one on each side. And I always say if you have a major injury like that when you rehab the next one, you have a little bit better understanding of what the rehab's going to be like and how much you can push. But still, there's no guarantee that you're able to come back at explosiveness, one of the last things we see. He was doing spin moves. He's been finding lanes and showing quickness to make cuts and make people miss him tackling. He looks really good.
3 spin moves on 1 run.
I know.
2 nights ago. It's crazy. You would whoop, whoop, whoop. I thought it was like a Madden glitch.
It was, exactly.
Oh, my God. But yeah, and he came with a ton of pedigree, right? I mean, we were talking about him with the highest of hopes going into year 2.
Yep.
Coming off of that Achilles tear. But this guy, I mean, it was really impressive to see. I think Dameon Pierce probably has a square peg in a round hole in that scheme. And Joe Mixon, obviously, they signed him to a big contract, but or to a new contract, I should say. 3 years, $27 million is legitimate money for a running back. I just would keep my eyes on Cam Akers because I just think that people, I think, who have not been closely watching preseason might say oh well, Dameon Pierce is one Joe Mixon injury away from being a factor again. I am not sure that's the case. I think, as a matter of fact, if I were to kind of bet my money on it right now, it will be Cam Akers as their running back too, and he has looked the part. It's one of the better under-discussed stories of this NFL regular season.
Certainly looks that way. You're definitely seeing the way they're using him, even in the preseason, kind of getting him out there.
Field, talk some sense into us for those very quickly who want to have any reason to think that Carson Steele could be the insurance back behind Isaiah Pacheco.
We were talking about this. Yeah,
he got some buzz this offseason and then the preseason here.
And he's a cool draft story. Bowling Green to UCLA for his college career, and had a great college career. But he was, had this great run in the Chiefs' final preseason game, and it was
everyone was pumped about it.
Yeah, with the backups.
Exactly.
So I believe, as boring as this pick would be, that if you're going to draft an insurance policy to Isaiah Pacheco, it would actually be Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And I know that he has been a bust relative to where he was drafted, but now, given that he is undrafted for fantasy purposes, he would actually represent a worthwhile pickup if you were trying to insure Isaiah Pacheco. And I do think that we've fallen into that backup Chiefs running back trap way too much over the past few years, right? I will not forget this. The Chiefs, because they have played in that opening night game, have reported to training camp. I won't forget this. Day 2 of training camp last year, it was Deneric Prince, clear-cut Chiefs running back 2, locked to make the roster. And it's I think he had 8 carries last year, and they were all in week 18.
Yeah.
So I am not taking the bait there. It is confirmed from the great Keith Lipscomb. Jaleel McLaughlin.
Not
McLaughlin.
Okay.
Not Glock.
Love it.
Yep.
Love
Not Glock.
Thank you very much.
Not cool, Keith. Awesome.
Of course, we can count on Not Cool Keith for that.
Yeah.
Of course.
Speaking of insurance running backs, Field, on Friday of this week, I was worried I was going to have to find an insurance running back host for the Fantasy Focus Football Podcast while we were down doing the ultimate draft experience at Bahamas in the Bahamas. I don't want to bury the lead. There's a lot of stuff we want to talk about, a lot of people we want to give thanks to and flowers to, but Field, come on. We can't bury this.
I'll try my best to make this a fairly short recounting of what happened this past Friday. But as part of the weekend, we had a combine, basically, to determine the draft order. It was a variety of activities, one of which included this obstacle course. the conclusion of the obstacle course was a blow-up quarterback dummy that you had the right to kind of run through. You could have just avoided him. You could have done what Mike Clay did, which is just tap that thing. Or you could have pretended like you were 17 and not 37 like I did, and go up and try to drill that freaking thing. So after a great morning in which we ran the Sandy Toes 40 and we were doing, quarterback accuracy contest, I figured let me test my luck with this obstacle course. And let me tell you, I was cruising. People on the beach. I mean, I was already confused for Tyreek Hill once earlier that morning because of my speed, like my elusiveness. Like people were like, "Oh my God, is this like Deebo Samuel, Barry Sanders? Like, who is this guy?" And then all of a sudden, we went through this obstacle course. And as we went through the obstacle course, I decided that it was important for me to go and tackle the crap out of this quarterback. And
we have video.
We have video. We're watching right now.
We're
We have
watching
video.
on YouTube. We have a video of said tackle and the aftermath.
Yeah, so I tried my best to crush that thing, and I knew right away something was really bad. And I have been very fortunate to avoid significant injury for the most part in my life. This has been by far the worst injury that I have endured. But I knew right away something was bad. Daniel, Mike, and I were there. Stephania was coming down shortly.
Yes, because remember, me of the torn plantar fascia could not participate
in
the
any of the
athletic
running
events.
Yes, exactly.
And so we had recorded a podcast. I was going upstairs to change and come down, and I was way up at the other end of the property, up in the hotel.
I was frantically texting Stephania after this happened to make sure
this
someone
happened.
was
So I
coming
take
down.
the hit, and I immediately am like, crap, please let me shake this off. But I know something is wrong.
Yeah.
I know this feeling. It's different than like, you stub your toe, you run into something, whatever it might be. I knew something was very, very bad and that I needed some sort of medical attention sooner rather than later. But I also was, candidly, like it's a little bit embarrassing when you're with 50 people all having a blast. It's 11 a.m. It's beautiful Bahamas resort. People are having a great time. So I'm like, let me just go sit down. And, it's weird is my shoulder, the headline is my shoulder was dislocated. It was hanging off my arm there. And I kind of could only grab my wrist to somewhat stabilize my arm.
We all thought it was a wrist injury because of that.
We just need to stop right here for a moment. Like, to everybody who watches injuries on TV and they're like, oh, he's grabbing his wrist in his hand. Like, a classic for a shoulder dislocation is to grab your wrist because you're trying to just keep your arm from moving. I mean, some guys will grab their shoulder, but often they'll just grab their wrist. So again, this is just a lesson to everyone out there. Like, all that Daniel's like, we thought, what's wrong with his
What's
wrist?
wrong? Did he break his wrist? What happened?
So thankfully, I guess, I don't know. I don't know, thankfully or not. It was not a wrist injury, but I end up, Stephania, and, I'll do this now because I think it's a really important thing. Like, we talk about this all the time. Like, there is simply nobody in the world who compares to Stephania with her knowledge of sports medicine and the way that she's able to apply it to fantasy football. But she's the hero of the day because I was in a bad spot, an unfamiliar spot for me, not just in terms of avoiding injuries, but we're down in a foreign country, right? And the amazing people at Bahamas and the medical staff were all wonderful. But, when you're in a bad spot, like there's something very, very comforting and familiar. My wife was on a plane down,
coming down
to be part of the rest of the weekend. She had to work on Thursday, so she couldn't join us till Friday.
This is the second time I've had to call the wife of one of my hosts to say, you're going to need to go to the hospital.
Yes. So it was, and Stephania came down. And you guys all know Stephania's, if you haven't heard, but like she's dealing with plantar fascia. Like her foot is on fire when she takes one step. I'm looking up and I'm like, Daniel, please get Stephania down here. Please get Stephania down here. And meanwhile, like all of a sudden I see her like emerging and I'm like, oh my God. And Stephania's running
quick
down the beach.
Yes.
And I'm like, she can barely walk and she's sprinting.
Like,
so
is that
she got
Bo
down
Derek?
there.
Oh no, it's Stephania. I had no idea.
Yeah. And Stephania, because like for insurance purposes, Stephania and none of us were able to really do anything because it would have really compromised my ability to go to the hospital. But Stephania kind of gave me a lot of the peace of mind that I needed, and she stuck with me for the entire day. We had to go in the ambulance together, and I want Stephania to tell a little bit about that ride. But we ended up probably from the moment it got separated and dislocated until the moment we left was probably 4.5 hours, and Stephania was there for every step of it, which includes, there's the physical part of it, but like, I'm sitting there and I'm like, all I want right now is for someone to take my shoulder and put it back in the socket.
Back in place.
And there's a ton of paperwork and insurance stuff. And truly, if Stephania wasn't there, I don't know what would have happened, but I would have been in a way worse spot. So I feel like I should be indebted to you anyways, but I am like forever indebted to you. And if people ever doubt the sincerity of how wonderful she is as a human and how brilliant she is with her medical stuff, like I now can say with even more firsthand knowledge that should never cross your mind. And she made me feel so much more at ease. And beyond, like on top of that, she's been a resource in the aftermath. After we finish this conversation, Stephania is putting me in her car and taking me as I go see a specialist for the next steps here. So my sincere thanks to you.
Well, thank you. Feels making
Stephania
me
is
blush,
the best.
but honestly, I would do it for any of you, as you know, because I'm adding up.
I'm like,
posts
Stephania,
that I
go
to
back to the
hospital.
freaking. I'm like, go back to the thing. Like, even when my wife got there and she came right from the airport to the hospital, she's like, you can just go. And you're like, no, I'm not.
I'm good.
She's like, I'm not leaving.
I'm going to stay
She's
here
like,
and make sure.
Not a
you're good.
chance. She's
Yeah.
like, I want to see this
I wanted
all
to
the
see
way
the
through.
X-rays, so I got to see the pictures, and I was just wanted to make sure everything. It's hard if anybody's ever been in a foreign country and been injured or ill. It's scary. It's scarier than when it happens in your backyard. So there's a lot to that peace of mind component. But honestly, the part, what people don't appreciate. First of all, I did say to Field when he was still sitting there with his shoulder out, next time a player goes down with a dislocated shoulder,
That's right.
he's like, I will never question their toughness
my
ever
God.
again.
Those guys are my
You see guys go off and they go in the back and they reduce their shoulder, put it back in, they put a harness on, they come back out and play. Think about that, and so Field has an appreciation. Anyone who questions player toughness, when you go through something like this, you appreciate it. But the ambulance ride, I kept saying was something out of like a Jason Bourne movie, because we are going down streets, and if you don't know, like, you can drive on the driving. Sometimes you're on the wrong side of the road there, and then we were deliberately going wrong way in traffic, and cars are coming head first towards us. Field's luckily in the back on a gurney.
Can't see any of those
Can't
things.
see.
Yeah.
But also the roads in Bahamas, not necessarily on par with the ones here.
As smooth.
Potholes, boom, boom. Field saying words I've never heard come out of his mouth every time we hit a pothole. And I'm thinking, just good thing he can't see, because we are splitting traffic, going up on curbs. We're next to cement trucks are moving over, and I'm thinking, how are we going to fit? But we got there. And everybody was lovely in terms of how they cared for Field. So that is the best part.
For what it's, you want
No, I really can't thank the staff at Bahamas, both before and after, doctors, Stephania.
I just don't want to forget this part. Field on the drugs after they put the
Oh my
shoulder
gosh, we
back.
have so many great,
Apparently,
so many great. Videos.
maybe the apex of my life. We're saying that.
What was funny was now I was with Chapin because she had arrived at the hospital. They take Field back. They're going to administer some drugs because they have to get your shoulder muscles to relax. They have to get you to relax, because now to put it back in is going to be uncomfortable after it's been out for a while.
Sure. So
When they let us back in, Field is laughing. He is high as a kite.
having a good time.
Having a good time.
Those were something.
Thanking everyone. And I will tell you this, America, that the doctor told us after. He comes up to Chapin, he goes, some people say a lot of crazy things when they're under the effects of these drugs. He goes, all this one said was, I love my wife. I love
That's
my
so
wife.
good.
Over
Good
and
for you,
over
Field
again.
Yates.
I love my wife.
She was,
So,
and she was great as well. And the reality is, I'm probably going to be close to a 0 as a parent for a little stretch here, which that's been, I'll deal with the other stuff. Work's been great. That's probably the part that in the 15 hours since we've been home has been the hardest reality, and it will be for a little while here. But I know Chapin is going to, carry the load like she usually does, anyways, for us. But
for what it's worth, Field, you're a Boston guy.
Yeah.
You're from Boston, so in your defense, you're used to those things being more underinflated than properly inflated.
Okay, I thought you were going to go a different direction there. Bravo, but I thought you were going to talk about Paul Pierce. And I'll just say this. Paul Pierce in that wheelchair makes a whole lot more sense now.
Now I get it.
I'm telling you, and I'm always a Paul Pierce guy, so I will never say a bad thing about him. But it did not deter what was an incredible weekend.
I was just going to say that. Shout out to Bahamas. Shout out to BDG Global and everything that they did. The Nice Man League. I Think You Should League. The Bahamian League. There were a bunch of people that came down, and it truly was. And other than this one moment, like the ultimate
It
draft
added to the
weekend.
lore.
Yes.
I mean,
Oh.
Field was a legend when we left the island.
Yes.
And I think that everybody, it just really proved like all the good of humanity. All the people who were there who were so wonderful. Field was a pro, came back and did the panel that day.
That's right.
After we got back from the hospital, he was there for the Q&A session.
We're not missing
But
work.
everybody who were all the people who came to draft with us, they really deserve the ultimate thank you because
Oh, yeah.
they rolled with everything and they were wonderful the whole time. It rained a little bit. They were fine with that. Everything, we had a wonderful time and we're planning our next trip.
That's right. Hopefully we have more news on that sometime soon. But for now, we love you guys so much. Thank you for hanging out with us. Daniel Dopp, Field Yates, Stephania Bell. We'll see you guys tomorrow. By the way, the show is presented by Fantasy Focus Football is presented by NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV.
I'm going to